naming every one of my favorite moments from each Backyardigans episode. What's up guys, it's Willie, and today's video, I thought it'd be cool where I talked about a particular moment that I liked from every episode of the Backyardigans. And this video topic was something I had planned, hence why I mentioned it in my announcement. So with that, this video topic would apply to many shows I've reviewed on this channel, and the Backyardigans is the best to start us off. So I'm gonna talk through each episode and name a specific moment that I enjoyed the most out of, and it's gonna be very interesting. Which, full disclosure, my rewatch for the show had concluded back in 2024, so old times have kind of faded from my memory, but I'll still do the best I can to memorize a moment I enamored. And plus, to talk about the rulings of this, I won't include any moment in the backyard sequence, because the whole gravitas here is to mainly focus on the imaginary adventure side of it, so I really want to push for that to be the niche of this criteria. Also, song sequences will not be included as well, as I feel like they're their own separate formula. In addition, I do have a video plan to rank every song down the road, so especially just leave it off for its own kind of scope. So with that said, let's get right into the video. Starting with Pirate Treasure. There's a lot I wanted to choose from that ultimately didn't make it. The first ever Pablo panic attack was pretty iconic, but that fell short. I also for some reason liked the sequence when they marked the letter Y instead of the X on the sand, because Y was always my favorite letter back in the day, but I did not go with that. So what I ended up picking was surprisingly the moment when they crash onto shore just as they're about to have Austin and Uniqua walk off the plank, which, hey, I like the little twist there where they were already reaching shore, so it isn't the end-all be-all for Uniqua and Austin's journey. And I like that twist, and I think it was a lot more creative from a humorous and storytelling perspective, so that's what I ended up picking. Next for Heart of the Jungle, and over time, as I move further away from this episode, the more I start to realize how much it meandered about too much, that it didn't really have an elite remarkable moment outside of its songs, which then again, they're completely nullified from the criteria for this video, so I really only had a couple choices. I did consider the Can't See 'em segment because I couldn't see them coming, but what I ended up just choosing was Uniqua in the quicksand moment, because like I said in the review, it was ironic considering how much she was so gung-ho on believing there were no quicksands that existed in the jungle environment. Well, reality speaks otherwise, and truthfully I remember this moment the most from this episode, even before my rewatch, so that's what I'm going to go with. Next is the Yeti, and truthfully the top contenders all come from the trio group side of things because we couldn't get enough of Uniqua and Tasha's bantering, but I ultimately did not pick any of that. I was close to picking the snowball escape sequence because it was just an entertaining action-packed moment, but by the end of it, I just ended up picking the one that is already a clip that I presented in the review, which was when Pablo revealed himself, only his eyes, that terrified Natasha, because I just think it's a great turnaround to essentially give her this comeuppance for all the overconfidence that she harnessed throughout this episode, and basically was the epitome of that, to have this episode really dunk on her hard, blended with proving her wrong. So by that point, I ended up picking this moment. Next is the Snowfort, and I have been really low on this episode because there really wasn't much going for it because the plot surrounding around a misunderstanding. So from the get-go, I just think my favorite moment is when they finally ran into each other and was given the best shocked reaction, especially when Pablo and Tyrone just fell off their ladder humorously and somehow got stuck in the snowbank. But this also, I feel like, the only truly remarkable thing that I can think of when it comes to this episode, where it culminates all of the misunderstanding that was elongating for a good chunk of the episode until this moment. Episode 5, Secret Mission. And in contrast to just the last episode, there are at least more things that I can talk about from this one as I like it more. The sequences where they would trigger a trap was definitely something noteworthy there. There's another moment, although really somber, is when Pablo lost his spy gadget in that room, which I always felt bad for him from the very first time I saw that episode, but I didn't choose that. There was also another moment that is easily glossed over, but I always for some reason had it stuck in my head, is when Uniqua tripped over the dinosaur skeleton's foot, because that had to be the way for them to find the dinosaur with the missing bone, but I ultimately didn't pick that. So what I ended up choosing was something that came afterwards, in the moment they were trying to piece the bone back together. And hey, I'll include Tyrone coming to the rescue with his maple syrup too. What I like from this is how laughable it is when Pablo tries to piece the toe bone back in, but then it humorously pops out. And I just audibly couldn't stop finding any amusement out of that. So that's why I ended up picking this one. Then next is Great to Be a Ghost, and there's a pretty definitive pick, but there was some contenders. In the beginning sequence, which I'm always upset I failed to talk about this in the review, that Tyrone was pretty nervous about Ghost and even expresses that in such an unsettling way. But obviously it's not part of the adventure, so it's completely out of the question. I do obviously like the moment when Tyrone had that ghost sheet drop on him and his reaction to it, but ultimately what satisfies me is the moment that Tyrone scared Tasha to the point where she locked herself in a room and Tyrone periodically saying boo and her just screaming repeatedly after each one, which I know can get repetitive, but it's just hilarious how it was portrayed, so I picked that one. Next is Riding the Range, and there was at least some contenders I wanted to pick. Paul's panic attack over losing a potentially old paint, but I didn't go with that. I also like it when Trio first met Tyrone and him rescuing them out of a canyon. That was something, but ultimately my choice came from the end sequence, and I guess my favorite moment was when Tyrone presented the skipping rope as his lasso, which finally confirmed that he was the culprit of Uniqua's missing rope. And I like how they're more kumbaya about it. But yeah, ultimately, I think that's clearly the definitive answer for me, and the one that I remember quite legitimately from this episode. The Key to the Nile, and okay, it's not really the most riveting pacing in the world, so most of my choices come from the destinations they were at. I mean, the Invisible Pyramid wasn't that really interesting outside of Pablo's freakout over it. And speaking of Pablo, I was close to picking the moment of him and Tasha finding the yellow flower, which Pablo humorously already spots it because Tasha clearly didn't get her eyes checked, but I didn't go with that. And I was also close to picking the part where they found the secret oasis, where she tries to snatch some of this water only for Austin to chastise her. I just found that segment to be funny, but not enough for what my choice ended up cracking up to be, which is, I guess, the Sphinx Uniqua segment, because we surely needed her appearance in the episode after being absent for almost the entirety of it. But I like how her personality is a contrast to Uniqua's, where she's at least more kindly expressive, which was what Tasha was lacking in this episode. Then next time, the Knights Are Brave and Strong episode, and it's another one that I didn't really have much connection to, so my choice was pretty limited. I mean, there's obviously Pablo's panic attack, which is fun and all, but not enough to crack it. And also Pablo himself, this segment with the door was kind of humorous, considering he didn't at least try to pull. But I'm gonna go for a random here. I want to pick the Mist segment where Uniqua meets with Tyrone, aka the Moose of the Mist. Which I should mention, I think this is probably the first where one of the characters truly was referred to their species, and in this case Tyrone. And factually, he gets that the most from this show. So it's interesting enough how they were a bit more self-aware in this segment. So then we got the Vikings episode, and there's some that didn't make the cut. I enjoyed the obstacles that the Vikings went through, but it just wasn't as much of a highlight to me. So I chose the moment that they finally interacted with Tasha the mermaid, where she basically was trolling them. But yeah, it was a somewhat riveting moment where Tasha kind of becomes a bit of an antagonist in this one sequence, and ultimately the Vikings finding a way to maneuver around her barrier was fascinating to watch, so I'm just gonna go with this one. And then we got Castaways, which, to be honest, I don't really have much I could go off of, because most of what the families like from this episode is the song itself, which honestly, if I didn't have that criteria, I would have been more than likely to pick it, but I don't break my rules, I follow them. So what I just decided to pick was the moment the Castaways finally found out that Austin was basically the mastermind behind all the fortunes they were getting in this episode, and I think it was probably a more endearing moment because it also allowed a development from Austin where he opened up that he was too shy to really show himself to them, which I can fully understand that, especially coming from an introverted side of things. So you know what? Hey, let's just put respect to Austin's name. I'm picking this moment. Race to the Tower of Power. I mean, the whole back and forth between the heroes and villains on their way to the tower was just fun enough, but I feel like each segment was pretty stable as we knew they were going to find their way out of the pickle they were in. So for the comical side of it, I'm just going to pick the defeating moment for Yucky Man and Dr. Shrinky, because there needed to be some way for them to get the retribution for all of their villainous acts throughout this episode, and I think having their own powers deflect on them being their true downfall was satisfying enough, on top of Austin being able to trap them in a cage and them just cartoonishly crying over their downfall was enough for me to look at this moment as a landmark from this episode. So then we got the Flying Rock episode, and I'll talk about the considerations, especially from the group side of things. I mean, for the boys, the tunnel movie segment was at least the most interesting of their obstacles, but I didn't pick that. And then for the girls, I like their obstacles more because it was interesting how they maneuver around them, but I just couldn't pick that. So in order to have some equity, I'm gonna pick the moment where all of them were able to piece the rock back together and fly with it. Because one, it satisfies the culmination of the episode where everyone got their moment to get their hands on it, as well as all of them finding their redeeming qualities to fix up their own mistakes. So I think this one's the best for me. Then we got the Pocus Palace party, and it's a tough one. I don't mind much of the sequences as they're more action-filled and entertaining at the same time, but I think the moment that really sticks to me will be when the group finds their instruments all cleaned and set up at the stage, which to this day, I'm always perplexed to know that the Wormans themselves were able to retrieve all 4 instruments from the water and get all of it set up and done before the group arrived at the party. Like, that alone was always something that boggled my mind, especially from a more storytelling perspective, but who cares? It's still something to remember this episode by, so that's what I ended up choosing. Now for Surf's Up, and honestly, I'll just get to the point. The part where the group finally found the Tiki Beach, especially that gigantic monument that matches with Pablo's Tiki charm, and honestly, it was a satisfying way to finally end off this long-awaited anticipation for them, especially Pablo, to eventually come across the location of the Tiki Beach. And I guess also at the same time, it's kind of like an aftermath of a little chase sequence they had when they were pursuing Austin, who was imposing as an anonymous lifeguard. So there's things that I can mirror with this moment. There's enough for me to pick it this one. So then our next episode, Eureka, and honestly, I think there's a serious argument that this episode is probably one that has the least lasting impact on me, and in other words, probably the most forgettable episode from the show. Not that I don't discredit much of my enjoyment from the episode, because there's things I can remember, like the whole concept of the characters just screaming Eureka that stuck to my mind when I watched this episode as a kid. I obviously find the blessing when the characters fulfill their goals, especially at the end where they were able to find what they needed to find in the gold and dinosaur fossils. But you know what? Let's take a step back and choose the moment where the scientists and processors indirectly cleared the air when they misunderstood each other's intentions. Because if they hadn't interacted, I think there could have been a serious, unexpected rivalry going on, all stemming from a misunderstanding. Which the trope of that is something that I personally don't like. So I'm glad that part was dealt with before anything could exceed from there. In our next episode, Race Around the World, and obviously this is an Austin coronation episode, finally giving him the main character spotlight that he needed. And there were some memorable moments. I mean, the whole parts where Austin helped each racer as they faced some level of adversity was something to take note of. But ultimately, I think the most satisfying part that I like is when Austin was able to win the race when he figured out the solution to get through the rope, which is basically cutting it. But yeah, a very fulfilling conclusion to this episode, and basically for Austin's arc too, as we saw his struggles throughout the race. And yeah, probably the first of the few awesome moments that I revere from this show. Then we have Monster Detectives, which everyone knows I have this episode as universally the bottom ranked episode of the show in its entirety, but that doesn't stop me from enjoying some of the more laughable sequences, especially from Uniqua's end, especially how much of a, basically no offense, dead weight she was to her dynamic with Tyrone this episode. So there was really only a couple that I wanted to pick from. The first one that I was pretty interested in choosing was the moment where Uniqua broke Pablo's trophy that led to the action sequence, since he's now alerted that there are intruders in his castle. But I feel like the fact that he had basically no reaction to finding his precious trophy in pieces kind of takes away from it, because I think that would have added a lot more of the travesty in his life, but that just ended up getting glossed over. So what I ended up choosing may come off the most randomest, but I'm gonna say when Pablo respectfully handed over tissues to Uniqua as a way to ease her sniffles, which indirectly led to their interaction that caused Tyrone and Uniqua to dash away from him. Like, the whole reason I like this is because it was a sign that Pablo was not a bad person like he seemed to perceive to be as, so that's why I ended up picking this one. Then we got Cave Party, and it's another one that barely has any options because I'm so detached from it. I mean, I like the whole sequence when Austin and Tasha were doing the drumming. That's notable there. The one of them trying on skates was fine enough, but that ultimately didn't become my choice, so I'm just going to go for a generic pick. I'm just going to pick Pablo's freak out over the height of the mountain because he states the obvious, but in the most comical way possible because he's Pablo. But yeah, that's pretty much all this episode can offer to me when it comes to some moment that I like, which is so marginal. But anyways, let's get to the next episode, which is High Tea, and unlike the Cave Party, at least there's much more of a plethora of good moments to choose from. I mean, their trip in Borneo was definitely interesting enough, and kind of felt like, to me, a more watered-down parallel to the Heart of the Jungle, because aesthetically it is similar, but I didn't choose that. I also like the Gobi Desert part, especially the gushing geyser, and even the moment where everyone got to enjoy their tea, but it just felt a bit too stable of a moment for me, so I just ended up picking the sequence with them trying to cheer up Austin, because he is the roadblock to our group retrieving the tea set. But I generally enjoyed the whole segment of them trying to get him to be happy, and ultimately Uniqua tapping into her comedian role was successful in that. And Austin's hysterical laugh afterwards has always stuck to my mind, especially because it's Austin, someone who's not as highly energetic in season 1, so that was a little nice shift in his character. Next up, Mission to Mars. And there's a lot to gauge off of. I did enjoy the aftermath of Astronauts Never Give Up, where they persevere through their adventure. I also like the moment where Austin reunites with Rover because he's like this pet enthusiast, but I didn't go with that, so I decided, you know what, as respect to Alicia Keys' name, I'm just gonna pick the moment where they met the mother alien. Because honestly, outside of the aspect of her being voiced by a celebrity, it's also surreal to see a character outside the main five to get some dialogue. Because normally on their adventures, these side characters or extras don't speak, but she's an exception to that. So I felt like that was something special that gives a lot to the landmark of this episode, so that's what I'm gonna go with. The next episode is Samurai Pie, and this one had a very easy answer, but there are also some contenders that I wanted to consider. I mean, Austin's success with the Great Pie was definitely something to note here. After all, Tyrone decided to challenge him after he brought it up, much to his dismay. And yes, I like the little obstacle part when the ninjas were trying to make their way to steal the Great Pie, but I was not going to go with that because it was clear I was going to go with the battle sequences. Since, hey, I put the whole clip of it on the review, and I still particularly like how dramatic it is and how comical they were using pies to fend off each other. But yeah, nothing from this episode will top this one, so easy answer. Alright, then we move forward to Scared of You, and this is an episode that I personally do sympathize with Austin a lot because of how much he felt like his birthday was shaping up to be all for naught. Like, there was some fine contenders. I mean, the segment with the mummy was something, the forest was interesting enough. Hey, even the vampire's castle with the closing stairs was definitely something dramatic, but come on, my personal answer would have to be the culmination of the story when Austin finally gets his surprise birthday party that also recontextualizes that Tasha never forgot his birthday, and I felt like that was really deep and shows, despite how much her scientific business means a lot to her, she still is able to take the time to put together a surprise party for her assistant. So I picked that one. Then next up is Whodunit. Oh, this one's brutal. One of the most top revered episodes for me from the show, so the selection is all over the place. I mean, I like the whole segment when Pablo interacted with the mysterious figure, which was Tyrone. That was an interesting setup to the mystery theme of this episode. I also love the dramatic entrance Uniqua made in, which she basically barged into the home herself, but I didn't select that. I mean, there's obviously the scene where the lights went out with Tasha losing her jewels in the process. I also love the humor when Austin basically scared everyone because he popped up in the backyard window, but I didn't choose that. So let's get to the point. I decided to choose the moment when Tyrone was revealed to be the mysterious figure who stole the jewels. But what I love about all this is after he was seemingly proven innocent to all of this, which adds to the irony, as well as the fact that I like how the show took the time to get everyone's reaction to this reveal. Like, that alone adds the gravity to this dramatic reveal, and that's why I ended up picking this. So next up, the Volcano Sisters episode, and it's another one that obviously has its Austin coronation episode because he would eventually prove himself that he's mentally skilled. But I won't take away some of the fun parts from this episode. I mean, the whole segment with the Volcano Sisters was intriguing, and them basically blowing the brothers out of their volcano, which I always remember that from the episode, but I didn't go for that. I did like the whole suspense sequence with Pablo and the oyster, but that's not my pick. So what I just ended up picking was the more sweet moment when Austin was now dubbed as Austin the Smart. It was satisfying enough to have him at least be no longer known as just Austin when he clearly had his own specialty, which was his skilled thinking. Then to the Secret of Snow, and this episode, I never really talk about how hard this one hits for me. Like, it's able to harness that emotional resonance I can have with it, and you know what, I'm just gonna cut to the chase here that my favorite moment would probably be the part where they finally understand the Secret of Snow, which was having good friends, and honestly, this is more so directed to Tasha's sake, where she felt like the character who was just way too self-absorbed with her own kind of business that she kind of pushed away others, including her assistant. So for all that mean-spirited decided for her to finally turn around at the end of this episode was what does it for me, and how it really shows how redeemable Tasha can be. So that's what I end up going with. Next is the Swamp Creature. And honestly, there's really not much I can go off of here because I think the pacing was just mostly middling until the end stretch picked up, but even then, it didn't have much of the charm to it. And it also had some like secondhand embarrassment, especially for Pablo and Unique's side, especially when they were exposed that they had no knowledge of a swamp creature, despite trying to hype the customers up that there was one. So the one I'm going to pick might not even be a group moment, but more so an individual character moment, particularly for Austin, where he delivers this savage lineup. Well, it is awesomely bad, and that alone just stuck to my mind, especially when it reflects on the awesomely bad nature of this swamp adventure that was clearly sloppily put together. So I went ahead with this moment. So then we got Horsing Around, and basically the storyline parallels the hare and tortoise story that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Now, truthfully, I was close to picking the moment that Tyrone won the race, but I just feel like it would be a bit too generic, especially with how blatant it was going to be when he became a piece to this horse riders losing storyline. So I'm not going to pick that. So what I ended up just picking is a more comical sequence is when the horse rider was scooting up the hill and whistling, because I just found that visual to be so amusing, and it's easily laughable because of how ridiculous it was, even with Austin's narration on top of it, just being that final touch to this. So I decided, hey, let's go for a more fun characters moment, and this is what I decided on. So then our next episode, which is the Valentine's special delivery episode, and I mean, there were some fun options to choose from. The moments when the bikers tried to put the mailbag back, but somehow was failing every time. Them trying to dress up as a mailbox, but Pablo ruining it was hilarious to me. Hey, even the little epic action scene when they both drove across the canyon to have the mailman retrieve his mailbag. But from my personal standards, because I'm not really the font for misunderstanding story tropes, I'm just gonna select the end part when the bikers reveal themselves to be the receiver of the letters, as well as clearing the air with the mailman since he thought they were bad. which I guess was kind of the sad norm of the profiling they get, but who cares? I like this moment, that's what I'm going with. So then we got the International Super Spies, and this time, because it's a two-parter, I am going to be going through my favorite moment from each individual episode. So let's start off with part 1, and honestly, despite how much I loved the storyline in this episode, the pacing for the first part wasn't as like the most elite thriller, but what I ended up selecting was the dance moments, because honestly, I enjoyed imitating them too when I was a kid, and plays off the tropes of what this show was about with its musical elements, so why not? The mirrors of the show comes from a lot of fun with moments like these. So then for part 2, and unlike the first one, at least my thrill is a lot more higher with this episode because it has strong end stretch to everything, so my option ended up being a very definitive choice, but it doesn't stop me from talking about some other moments I liked. I mean, Pablo tricking Unico and Tyrone to count to 3, which I don't know why they weren't paying attention to what was going on, but okay. I did like the moment when Pablo confidently said that he's not ticklish, where he had no reaction to when Unico tried to manufacture that robotic hand to tickle him. And I never talked about this and how I had this weird Mandela effect that Pablo actually reacted to it and laughed, but reality spoke otherwise. So I just ended up choosing the moment when Pablo used that pizza box, which was a jetpack, to save Unico, because it really goes to show how despite their opposition to one another, there is clearly some care that he put into Lady in Pink, which hey, respects, because Unico wanted to be a spy just like him, so honestly that makes everything worthwhile. So then we get to Movers of Arabia, and I got some interesting parts to talk about. I mean, in that one moment when Uniqua was startled by the moving Tyrone statue, I just like how she screamed in a weird tone and threw it away just as Pablo saves it. I also like the part when Austin was revealed to be the genie when Pablo wasted a wish that summoned him. But I didn't go with that, so what my option ended up being is probably the obvious, the wind in the box one, because it still sticks to my head the ridiculousness surrounding it and just how both Pablo and Unico get blown back from a breeze in the box. So that's what I ended up going with here. So then for cops and robots. And I mean, most of my favorite moments currently comes from the chase sequence and the back third, because I didn't really find myself invested until then. But to talk about it, I mean, I like the moment when they were hit with a red light. When in the rules of like vehicle chases, red lights are completely glossed over. But here I just like how both factions follow the laws behind this. I did always remark the moment when Tasha and Pablo's ship shut down because the rear of the ship got destroyed in the process, but I didn't go for that. So I just ended up picking is the somewhat defeat of Pablo and Tasha, well, basically turning them to good robots. It's just satisfying for a downfall, especially the hubris they had, but seeing Tasha's reaction by screaming no when she lost Pablo did hit hard. I mean, that's what I like from villain defeats, is when they express their distraught over their sudden downfall. And although I didn't personally, Austin's hits better, which I'll talk about soon, I still like this one a lot too because it had that gravitas, so that's what I ended up picking with. So then we got Sinbad Sails Alone. Let's get to the contenders. I did find myself interested in the moment when Pablo revealed himself to have snuck onto Sinbad's ship, forcing him to now be a part of his adventure. But I don't think the moment is as big as it could have been. I mean, I can talk about the running gags of when Tyrone kept falling into the water and getting bonked on the head with the preserver ring, but I just more so feel bad for Tyrone, as he probably would have had less of a burden on the trip if Pablo didn't come along. But then again, the opposite effect comes to play when they reach the rainbow. But I think my definitive answer would be when Pablo was able to save the ship from falling off a waterfall at the end of the rainbow. And also I'll include the aftermath where Sinbad expresses his pleasure for him coming along despite his mantra of sailing alone. So I think that was a satisfying enough conclusion to this story plot, and that's what I chose there. Then we got Best Clowns in Town. I think everyone knows what the obvious answer is going to be, but I can still share a bevy of considerations I had. I mean, the whole chase after the train in that small clown car was funny, especially with how bad of a driver the clowns were and them crashing to a barn in the process. Hey, the moment when Tyrone finally accepts the clowns into the circus was a bittersweet conclusion to his dynamic with the clowns, and also had some fun with the moment they used a unicycle to get across a canyon. But the definitely is obviously the moments that Tyrone screamed clowns, since that was the running gag for the episode, something that I always remember when I first watched this episode and stuck to my mind ever since. And also a kind of surreal moment to see Tyrone this angry, because he's always had this built-in perception of this being really laid-back, cordial character. So for that to shift all in this one episode with him expressing possibly his most angriest moments is purely surreal and also comical too. So then we got Save the Day, and I barely care for this episode, but to generally talk about the moments that I almost chose, I mean, I can briefly talk about when Tasha was whistling Pop Goes the Weasel, because that always was sticking to me. Hey, hence even her finally catching her Whopper was something to take note of, but I just think it was just all nonchalant. So what I ended up picking was when Tasha, Tyrone, and Pablo were saved after exposing themselves to a stormy weather, and thanks to Uniqua operating a helicopter, blended with Tasha's fishing rod being the main material to save everyone, I guess that's good enough for me to select this moment. So then next up, we got the episode Into the Deep. I mean, it is a very soothing episode, to say the least, and it is come with its fun moments. I mean, I can say the more exaggerated moment is when Tasha and Uniqua just blows away a yellow fish who was just passing by, because I guess they're just hell-bent on keeping their gardens safe. I also did like the moment that Tasha and Uniqua chose to save Pablo and Tyrone from the cave-in despite them being intruders to them, which goes to show the heart that they have. But ultimately, what I decided to pick was when Pablo and Tyrone were able to fulfill their goal of capturing something special on film, which was Mermaid Tasha and Uniqua, and without also clearing the misunderstanding, it was good enough that led to me choosing this. So then our following episode, Newsflash, and quite frankly, I only have such meager amount that I can assess. I mean, I like the moment of Pablo's panic attack over the mention of an alien, but that did not get picked. The part where Pablo and Tyrone's hoax was exposed was definitely unique because us viewers saw right through their trick with this cardboard spaceship and Tyrone's pretty much bad cosplay of an alien, but I also tend to get secondhand embarrassment from it too, so I just chose the part when the real alien comes and gets the interview that Uniqua always desired, which would end up being such a great newsflash. So I think among all the good moments from this episode, I think this is the best one to take away from. Then we got Catch That Butterfly, and it's been known that I'm not a pro for this episode because of how slightly I was annoyed with the misfortunes that happened. So honestly, I just want to pick the moment that Pablo finally got to catch that gold butterfly because that was the whole goal to begin with and at least was fulfilling. And although there was another moment that I did like with the character's dramatic reaction when going up a steep mountain, but ultimately this moment just beats it out of the ballpark in lots of ways. So yeah. And then for a giant problem, it's got its amusing moments. I mean, the whole debacle with the wizards was just laughable. I also think it was hilarious every time they would somehow make their way back to Uniqua's castle and her just continuously get more angrier with their incompetence to stop a giant. I also found it a hilarious scene when Tasha chased after the wizards even in their horse forms because she just wanted to play. And I was also pretty close to picking the moment where Uniqua became a giant too, so then she can finally break out of her mold of being grouchy so much and actually enjoy her life with friends. But ultimately, I decided to choose the moment when the wizards turned into giants and finally realized that Tasha was just an innocent giant who just wanted to play, and them engaging in her activity was very sound to see their change of heart for her. So even though I like the moment that Uniqua finally became a good guy at the end, I still think the setup with the wizards' interaction with Tasha was better because, hey, at least they are more kumbaya than Uniqua was. Following that, we have Who Goes There, and most of my interest stems from the art trio themselves. So which moment do I like? Well, for some honorable mentions, I do love recalling the moment Pablo caused those sarcophagus statues to fall one by one like dominoes, because something like that ended up mirroring another event in a future episode, which I'll talk about. But I also like the sequence when they tried to hide in a flower painting and had to switch places because Austin plates flowers, and boy, he would take that to a further extreme in flower power. But honestly, the moments I like is when Tyrone finally knows the truth that the art trio are the real culprits to the mess that has been occurring. And I enjoy how they give Tyrone such a shock of his life and ending off with trying to play tag with him too, which was a hilarious touch to what would end up leading to a fun chase sequence. But yeah, I think this moment was a great pinnacle to shape up the back third of the episode's plotline. Then we got Blazing Paddles, and despite it being a solid episode, there's really only a definitive moment that I can think of, and that is the moment that Uniqua, under the alias Pink Fury, being able to beat Pablo in the ping pong tournament, with her even being able to blaze through his equipment in the process. So obviously, give that respect to her, and perfectly reflects on her persistence since she's the town sheriff and keeps their townspeople safe, and is also such a satisfying downfall for Pablo, with all this hubris he had falling in complete ruins after he unexpectedly lost the tournament. So with all that, there's no question that this was going to be the pick. So then we got Garbage Trek, which I know I did get a bit of flack for labeling this as the worst Season 3 episode, and while I do somewhat stick by that, I have softened on it a bit more as another episode kind of lowered over time. But anyways, my reason for that reflects on the lack of significant moments in this episode. I mean, I can say when the Musketeers tricked the garbage collectors, that was something that was notable from my childhood. But you know what? I think the best moment from this episode just has to be when both factions saved each other from the black hole. And honestly, while there was a fake out that the Musketeers were about to abandon the collectors after they literally saved them by handing them their garbage for the fuel. They did come back to save them, obviously, as a compensation for their rescuing for them. So while a pretty generic pick, I still hold this one to much high regard from this episode. Then we got Fly Girl, and there are some pretty notable scenes, especially with how Uniqlo just continued causing a burden to every individual she met up with. And let's look at her segment with Pirate Moody. I do genuinely enjoy a lot because, I mean, I love the conflict that's mostly exuded from Pablo's end, but I didn't go for that. I really wanted to pick this segment at Tasha's Palace because, taking back to what I said about a moment mirroring the Domino segment in the Who Goes There episode, yeah, this is the episode I'm talking about in regards to the pillars that were falling over like dominoes. And yeah, it was a fun parallel, and the only one I remember from this episode on my initial watch, but I didn't go for that. And then Tyrone's mountain segment, it was fine at least. I mean, the only other time Tyrone is angry, but not to the Ringmaster level angry, but still humorous enough. But ultimately, I decided to select the part where those three individuals get a moment to appreciate Unique's help in cheering them up, even though she's been causing them a mess. But still, I like how their expression caused Unique to cheer up herself, since she felt really disheveled after what appeared to be a disastrous day on the job. So I think that moment really hits hard for me from this episode. Then we got What's Bugging You, and there's some to choose from. I mean, Tasha's terrified reaction with the moments was hilarious, especially how she screamed. I also do love Pablo as Mr. Spiffy, where this is the most serious we've seen from him, but I didn't go with that. And also, I guess I can talk about the cupcake segment when Tyrone and Uniqua made a mess in the kitchen, but I didn't go for that. So the moment I picked made me random, but I always found the humor in it, and that is this fun interaction between Pablo and Tasha when he felt a worm on his head, which is laying on his hat. So then Tasha just quickly grabs it and chucks it away and just brushes it off like it was just his hat on his head. And I think that was just so comical how it sounded. So I will pick this moment. Then we got Chichen Eats a Pizza, and how dare you rob Pablo his chance to appear in this episode? What show have you become? Enough said. Moments I can pick from this episode, I did like the first temple sequence when Tasha and Uniqlo had to bike away from a boulder rolling towards them, because that's the one thing that I remembered a lot from the episode. I also do like the segment when the two of them would eventually lose the pizza, because it added a lot more intrigue to the climax of the episode. But also at the same time, I do feel bad for them, because how's Tyrone going to react when he doesn't have his pizza? So you know what? I personally think my favorite moment might be when Tasha was finally able to have the courage to retrieve the pizza that was located at the top of Tyrone's temple, because despite her desire to quit the job, she also at the same time really cared for her friend Uniqua and didn't want her to get a lot of blowback because she and Tasha lost the pizza. So I think this was a great moment to reflect on Tasha's development to overcome fear, and at the same time also show the strength of her working relationship with Uniqua. So then we got to the center of the earth, and honestly, most of the intrigue comes from the section they had stopovers at, where we started with the bouncy layer, and while I can pick the moment where it showed how much the inventors desire the invention way rather than the normal way to retrieve the penny, it did exhibit a really divisive outlook on their approach. I also personally do like the crystal segment where they just continued slipping away to catch one tiny penny, but for me, I think my favorite moment or segment is when Tyrone finally got his penny back, and it was thanks to the help of a dinosaur, which obviously the whole sound of that is just crazy, but a dinosaur living near the center of the earth and being the one to return Tyrone's penny is still a landmark that is held ingrained in my brain that urges me to pick this moment as the best. So then next up, we have front page news, and while I'll say I do like some segments like Tasha accurately predicting how Pablo's going to react when she reviews her failing to get a news photo, that was some strong interlaced content, but I didn't go for that. I do like both Tyrone and Uniqua's handlings with the robot, but it still wasn't as big of a hit for me in terms of significant impact, so I didn't choose them. And now to what my pick ended up being, well, I did already show the clip in the review, but I do like the moment when Tasha revealed herself to be Super Snap, especially towards her boss Pablo, who I can resonate with his impressed reaction to her revelation alongside the other heroes. And I think it was pretty pretentious of Tasha to do it at the moment she finally got her chance to solve the robot situation. So with all that, it's easily my pick from this episode. So then after us, we have another two-part episode, which was Mighty Knights. And obviously we started with part 1, and while there's some segments I enjoy, like Pablo literally launching his crown off his head, that was funny. The egg rolling away when the knights tried to stop it, it was humorous how they got beat by it. And the knights themselves trying to be stealth to avoid getting spotted by Pablo. It's something to note there. But you know what? I think a moment that always gave me nostalgia is when Grappling Goblin Austin stole the Mighty Knight's stuff, their flashlight, shield, and other gear, and doing it all stealthily while in the dark. And I'm impressed by his moves. And it's a part that I can recall from my childhood. So I'll go with this pick. Then we just continue on to part 2, and there's a lot more funny moments that I can recall. Fairy Tasha just trolling around the group is just hilarious. I mean, Austin himself being able to grab hold of her wand and casting random spells with it, I just think that was so humorous. But generally, the end part with the Dragon Mountain is what I think the true peak comes from. So what is that peak? While I did enjoy the little scramble sequence when they finally met the dragon, who they were unaware hatched from the egg, but ultimately, I think the moment when they were saved by that dragon is what really does it for me, because not only does it prove that the dragon is nice, it's also a confirmation that that was the same dragon who was in the egg that they were trying to protect. So it was a great revelation that ultimately led me to pick this one. So then we got the Master of Disguise. And personally, while I could try and consider segments where Austin interrogated all the innocent folks on the train, it did get a tad annoying since it's obvious that it's not him, especially when the Master of Disguise is literally a blue penguin. So then what I ended up choosing here is the moment Pablo laughed and revealed himself to be the Master of Disguise after Uniqua's joke. But I also want to talk about how it kind of perplexes me how we never actually got Austin to laugh at the joke, which to be fair, the joke is lame to begin with. However, it would have been cool to see how Austin sounded when he laughed too, which to be fair, we know is just snorts and giggles. But yeah, a somewhat interesting downfall for Pablo this episode, and that's why I picked this one. So then afterwards, we have the Olympus episode, where to talk about some fun moments, I mean, Pablo and Tyrone's interactions with both gods in Austin and Uniqua was interesting, while I'll say it did get repetitive when the same thing was just happening, and it was there just to pad out the episode. It was at least a tad important piece that would lead to them befriending them to then take on Tasha at the end, which, in speaking of, my favorite moment from this episode would have to be when they beat Tasha in that basketball game. And hey, I also include the moment when she fell through the clouds alongside the other two gods. So I guess some comeuppance they get for messing with Tyrone and Pablo. I mean, Tasha deserves it the most, but still, a fun enough moment that continued to be fun and enthralling every second along the way. Okay, then our next episode is the Great Dolphin Race, and I can point out a few contenders. Uniqua meeting Sea Squirt was interesting enough. The whole training session with him was humorous, especially with some mishaps that would occur, but I didn't choose that. And I also really wanted to pick the moment where she and Sea Squirt were able to beat Tyrone in the Dolphin Race, because it was pretty satisfying for Tyrone to lose after the amount of hubris he had in the episode. But I think that's mostly fundamentally taken away after his somewhat change of heart after the moment that I am going to be picking, which was when Sea Squirt saved the day and stood up against the giant clam that he was fearful of earlier. So it was a great rebound for his character, and that's what I ended up picking here. So then next, Arcaven's best friend episode, where I think throughout it was pretty endearing with Austin's interaction with his pet boy, and while I do like that, it's not really the best moment that I can think of. I mean, I do like the parts where it shows Boy being so overpowered, like able to rip off the bumper of a police car and drag an entire fire truck towards a tar pit. Like, those are significant, but they're definitely not like the greatest moment. So I guess what I ended up choosing here is when Austin was finally able to whistle, because that was what was set up throughout the episode, and for him to finally fulfill that is pretty fulfilling, and also makes Austin feel the sense of validation for being able to do it at the right time to save everyone's lives. So then we move over to Ranch Hands from Outer Space, and I do get a lot of entertainment from this episode, stemming from the missteps the aliens cause. Like, the fence part is always something that I just am riveted non-stop. But yeah, I guess give them credit for effort. They at least were willing to build one, they just didn't build it the right way. I do also like when they were trying to redecorate Tasha's house, but misunderstanding the term orange being the color, not the fruit. And it's just hilarious with Tasha's reactions in the process as well. But you know what? My personal pick may be a little bit lame, but I'm just gonna select the moment when Pablo and Uniqua use the penguin to put it in their fuel disc so it can fuel their ship, and at the same time Tasha spying on them, because that moment really stuck to me since my childhood, and also in a way upset me because pancakes are usually my favorite food, and it was kind of sucky that we never got to see any of them like munch on it. But from a storytelling perspective, it was a great sense of satisfaction for this episode's resolution. So I think I like this particular moment the best. Then we got Robin Hood the Clean, and honestly, my opinion of this episode has lowered a bit, but doesn't stop me from liking a lot of what it had to offer. I mean, Austin as a villain was just everything in this episode, and while he's a lot more deadly in another episode later on, I still enjoyed his role as a mayor of the Stinkfest. I was pretty close to picking the fight between Austin and Pablo because it was really intriguing, but I think another one just on sentence, and it's when Pablo, for some reason, was able to scare Austin into backing up into the fountain, causing him to bathe in the process. And honestly, it's one of the greatest moments because of how Austin reacted to his defeat, just being all scrambly and panicky over being cleaned by water. Like, I had that brief moment ingrained in my head, so I'm gonna go with this pick. Okay, then our following episode, which is Escape from Fairytale Village, and while it plays off the tropes that I simply am not the greatest fond of, I think this was done in the most comical way possible, with just non-stop thrill and entertainment. Like, we can start off with when Tyrone mistaken Austin as a big bad wolf, and it was just funny how Austin presented himself. And the same thing with Uniqua as the witch. And I'll also highlight when Tyrone met a giant Pablo, which the way he found out was parallel to when he met a giant Tasha, so he's got a pretty wild experience with giants. So personally, my favorite moment with this episode is his essential escape sequence with him trying to get away from the 3 fairy tale characters, and it's just how hilarious it was, him running down the supposed enemies who are gonna eat him, also trying to hide in some hay bales, which lead to a pseudo Monty Hall-esque style, but ultimately I think it's just such an enjoyable ride because of how hilarious Tyrone was this episode. So then we got that Pirate Camp episode, which is an episode of 2 halves with like the training storyline to then the Red Boot storyline, but it was comprised with some really fun moments. I mean, I did like at times that Austin had to shut off the treasure chest every time Pablo tried to get his hands on the Red Boot. The mess ups there would be with the Pirates Camp students was definitely something riveting, but ultimately I think the back half with the Red Boot storyline was definitely the most interesting out of this episode. So what is the best moment from that section? Well, to talk about considerations, I did partially want to pick the one where Red Boots finally transform into an actual living soul, but I didn't go for it. And although how scary it is, I did also consider the moment when Austin was being dragged to the cave because he had the Red Boot on, but I personally think my favorite moment is still going to be the Tasha and Pablo interaction because it's just so wacky how it came off as, and the way Pablo just sprinted away from her while she chases after him, which because she's a ghost, she's floating after him, is just a comical visual that I can't not think of picking this part. And then the episode revolved around the Musketeers, and I've continuously gone down on this episode, but to generally talk about it, I mean, the only highlights that I can take away from it is like when Tasha revealed herself to be the Empress, which I bet I couldn't see that a mile away when the Empress is literally a hippo. I will say the moment Tyrone and Pablo were cuffed to go in prison, especially by the hands of Uniqua and Austin, kind of felt like a weird callback to like the Tower of Power episode, where in the hands of those two, Tyrone and Pablo would end up being inside a cell. But obviously I didn't like it because we were meant to root for them. So what really I ended up picking is another strange choice. I pretty much liked the segment with Austin expressing his brief infatuation of the Musketeers' skills, much to Uniqua's irritation. And I'm always mad at myself that I didn't mention this in the review because it's just a humorous segment, especially when we got to the part where the Musketeers jumped out with Austin expressing his amazement and immediately followed up with Uniqua just saying, "Austin!" It's just so funny, man. And it felt like he picked up what Pablo would have been because this is normally a role that Pablo would be perfectly suited for, but you know what? A nice little change of pace here. So then we get to the Mask Retriever episode, and whilst there are some pretty strong parts like Uniqua's Musketeer stealth skills that was suspenseful, the pursuing of Don Austin was a decent action scene. Oh, and I guess I want to point out the moment when Uniqua just cornered Austin, much to his horror, but quite frankly, I think the one that really stuck out to me is their interaction afterwards, where Uniqua finds out that Austin had not really finished the book, and he's been taking a long time to read it, which would lead to the aspect of renewing a book, which I like how it adds to the factual elements on library books, where if it's overdue, you can just renew it if you're not done with it. And so it's cool to see how Uniqua really informed him the intricacies surrounding a library renewal before departing and urging Austin to quickly get to the library before it closes. So that will be my pick. So now we can get to the final two-parter, which was Robot Rampage. And obviously talking about part 1, there are some scenes that offer stuff to the table, which is mostly the one where we had each character's respective robot going on a rampage. I mean, Uniqua's robot having a cookie dough meltdown, that was some funny drama. There's Tyrone's with the mail boxes, which just sound absolutely ridiculous. And I also do love the intrigue surrounding Tasha's robot operating their respective vehicle maniacally. But ultimately, my choice ended up being the ending of the episode, where we have Paulo reveal himself to be the culprit and say his dramatic line in gaps, "I rule Mega City." And I enjoyed every ounce of it, and especially when the ending was probably one of the most climatic cliffhangers to a two-parter, which as a kid I was always intrigued for whenever the second part came, because after watching that first part it always was stuck to my head, how are they going to get out of the situation they were in? So that's what I ended up picking. So then finally to part 2, and equally has its fair share of notable moments. I mean, when that one screw loose became a robotic fly and horrified everyone inside, it was something to remark on this episode. I also do like Austin's fierceness in the escape segment when he quickly unscrewed every evil robot screw loose with his screwdriver, so that definitely shows how combat skilled he is. But I think my choice, while a bit tame, was something that satisfied what the plot was setting up, and that was Pablo's downfall, which once Austin was able to shut down Rex's robot, it rendered Pablo completely powerless at this point, leading to him to let his sword down. And while it is kind of underwhelming for his motives, I do partially find some sort of merit that Pablo is willing to inherit some redeeming qualities by trying to fix up all the robots that he corrupted, which is a shame that we never got an episode of that, because it could have been interesting if this show did have a season 5, but whatever, this is gonna be my pick. So next up we got Catch That Train. And there was a couple considerations. I mean, Tyrone literally sleepwalking while the train was in motion. That was something to remember the episode by. I'll say the running gag of Pablo being labeled brilliant by Uniqua. It was always impactful because of how indirect Pablo would help configure the solution. But then I also considered the end part where Tyrone is blessed with his train ride, but honestly, I think I'm gonna gravitate my choice to being the rail switch segment, which was very suspenseful, especially because for some reason the rail was switched to the direction where the broken bridge was. So it made things more nail-biting as we have Uniqua and Pablo in action to get the railroad switched, and I like the theatrics of it, so that's gonna be my choice. So then we move on to the 50-foot Worman episode, and like always, there's a bevy of moments I revered. I mean, Sherman dashing over to the pile of popcorn was something that made me laugh because of how good the scene was tracking him, which then again, it's CGI animated, so it's always poised to do that, so I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. I did enjoy the running gag with Pablo making the wrong formula because he doesn't at least try to test it out on a popcorn for some reason, but personally, I think the resolution scene with them finally able to shrink Sherman back to his normal size is what satisfies me enough to pick this part as my favorite scene from the episode, so there's that. Dragon Express, where there were some solid moments. I mean, Austin trying to get Windy to mimic Pablo and Maverick's moves was decent enough to show some of the acumen with his dynamic with Pablo, even though Pablo can exhibit too much of the hubris. I did generally like how climatic it was when they were in the Ice Palace, where because of Pablo and Maverick's errors by not being able to find a physical mailbox, it led to a near cave-in. And I do personally like when characters who have such excessive pride finally facing some level of adversity, and Pablo and Maverick do fall fate to that in an interesting way. But definitively, my answer is going to be when Austin and Windy flew in to not only help them, but also get the mail delivered before the inevitable catastrophe occurs. And honestly, a great way to give a decent enough resolution to this working dynamic. Then we finally get to Flower Power, and this one's brutal. Like, I obviously have personal emotional resonance with this episode because Austin delivered his villain role this episode spectacularly. So majority of my contenders really come from anything associated with him. So while I do love the moment when Uniqua was able to get her flower powers, it was just fine. But then we get to the legend himself, Gloomeister, and his time to shine. I mean, his fake evil laugh moment was very notable. His battle with Uniqua was compelling. And the choice I almost went with was his downfall, where his reaction to when Uniqua destroyed his machine, leading to him screaming no, which honestly had a much more lasting impact than Tasha's. And from the context of obviously knowing his motives, I do sympathize with his backstory, but I felt like it was a bit too much for me to really pick it, so I just ended up picking the aftermath where he's being confronted by everyone about his villainous actions, and seeing how distraught he looked further hit hard for me, which led to him with a bit of hesitation opening up his fear of flowers. And you know what, because I have his character analysis topics I want to cover soon on this channel, maybe I might do one for Gloomeister so there can be more to dwell upon than in this video. But yeah, I decided this moment was for the favorite because it felt a lot more sensible about his motives, which I don't think any other villains on the show really had that kind of backstory to ground their motives. Then our next episode, Funny Man Boogeymen, and oh dear, this one's a rough episode, but there's one particular moment that always gets me with, but I'm going to talk about the other considerations, where the moment Uniqua and Pablo got spaghetti on their eyes, it was funny how they jumped to the conclusion that it was haunted goo and just screamed and fled the scene. I also did somewhat like the slapstick humor with how Austin spotted the two hiding behind the chairs, completely contrasting their confidence that he didn't see them. And then the moment when he got out of that force field was funny because it proves that he's basically impossible to capture. But really, my favorite moment that always made me laugh was when Pablo and Uniqua blinding each other with their camera flashes, and their reactions were just humorous. Like, how can you not pick a comical moment like this? So then next up is Follow the Feather, and I've got a few to talk about. The segment in that temple was pretty tense, though a bit dragged on a bit too long, especially when it started crumbling around them, which, get the heck out of there. I did also like the sequences when Tyrone interacted with the mysterious lady in Uniqua, because she added an uncanny element to the story, but I didn't pick that. And also, I guess I will talk about the scene of them trying to find their way up the giant feather mountain, but it was nowhere near my pick, so for the satisfactory purposes, I'm just going to select the moment that the polka dot pony finally got its feather back and be able to regenerate its colors and land, because it felt like some level of accomplishment that was worthwhile for this adventure. Then next up, Breakout, which is another one that's going to be brutal for me because I've got so much to gauge off of. I mean, the first part I can truly talk about is the stealth section when Uniqua and Tasha had to avoid the guards. Hey, even having to swing across the chandelier to get to the lower level. The later scene was very fun, and although it was unfortunate they ended up triggering it, it offered more to the tension with this escape adventure. Dare I say, I also like this moment that emphasizes on the smart thinking of hiding on top the elevator roof to avoid being ambushed by the guards who are probably waiting for them at the bottom floor. There's also the moment of them being able to deploy their jet shoes and retrieve the magic mirror back from the guards. That was something fun to watch. And I'll also mention about the princesses saving the guards from the moat, because for some reason it kind of reminded me of the Snowfall episode, hence it's with the same exact characters with the same exact act they do. But ultimately, my pick would always be the Austin trying to mimic Pablo's expressions to mask off this magic mirror persona, because it's just funny how Pablo seemingly falls for it too, despite the fact that Austin is a kangaroo, not a penguin. And unfortunately for him, Tyrone saw right through it too. But yeah, probably the most memorable part of the episode, and I'm gonna pick that one. So then our next episode, which was the other Christmas episode, where honestly, I haven't had much attachment to the episode as a whole, but I think my pick will be the moment that always stuck out to me, which was when the Abominable brothers answered Santa's call and learned the truth that the sack that they had stolen was actually belonging to him, which was just a fun revelation that it had to be Santa's own voice that convinced them to bring it back. So without a doubt, I think this moment of a turnaround for the Abominable brothers was worth highlighting from this episode. So then the following episode, where we had the Lost Galacticos go to space, and there's a couple of moments I liked. I mean, I'm finding out that they were on a flying spaceship was humorous. Their struggle to even operate it was comical. But personally, I think the moment that they fought back against the Googors is always and will be an outstanding moment, especially how much deserved karma the Googors were getting for their heinous act. Now, to be fair, I don't think the inevitable collision that they're about to have was warranted, and I'm glad the band saved them in time, as I did start to feel a bit bad in a way, where I really wanted to see these villains feel a sense of remorse for their actions, and they somewhat did. But anyways, with all that, this is an easy choice for me. Then we got For the Love of Socks. Another pretty intense episode. I mean, let's start from the beginning when Tasha dropped her pencil into the machine that caused it to spit out like millions of socks, which was just funny how they were trying to continue business while all of that hecticness was happening in the background. I did enjoy the gag when Pablo was proven wrong about the pencil not causing any mayhem to these machines, but oh boy, it aged like milk. But really, it's the yarn ball room that truly mesmerizes me. And likewise, the moment that I'm always profusely liking is when Tasha dramatically says For the Love of Socks as she slams on the stop button to shut down everything. So yeah, like it or not, it's probably the pinnacle of the resolution for this episode. Then we got the Flipper episode, and a lot of it just comes from Pablo's end. I mean, first and the most obvious being his last panic attack moment, because longtime fans really missed that. But other better moments in this episode just beat it to it. So yeah, I would also mention Pablo being able to transform into the Flipper, but I didn't go over that. And also, I could mention the moment when Pablo lost his teddy, where intertwined with the fall of the meteor, it starts to make him lose his sense of self, which Tasha and Unico desperately try and get him to snap out of it. But for me, the most solid answer is when Pablo in his Flipper form was able to swat the meteor back away and succeed in his mission. So through that, this is the part that I liked from the Flipper. So then our following episode, which involved the elephant, and likewise, there were some solid moments that were in contention. I'll say I did like the part where Paul Tyrone and Austin and Uniqua were distracted arguing with each other as the elephant got away on its own, like no one was paying attention, but I didn't go with that. I did also really like the segment of Austin trying to get instructions from Uniqua as the elephant is making noise, not really in the background, but on the sideline, as it also messes with Uniqua's hat in the process too. So that was funny, but ultimately I ended up picking the moment where Pablo and Tyrone were able to finally retrieve the elephant and skydive with it out of the plane. And on top of that, there was some humor with the fact that Uniqua ended up dropping and shattering her special tar after her shocking discovery. So yeah, that is enough to merit the strong qualities of this moment. So then next we got to talk about the magic skateboard. I mean, there are some moments to discuss and acknowledge. The funny interaction with Tyrone and Uniqua where Tyrone falls and the obvious is acknowledged by Uniqua, but I don't go for that. I also do really enjoy the moment when he finally found that magic skateboard and was having a blast using it. But in my personal essence, I think it's fair to say that the strongest part to this episode is where Tyrone won the skateboard race, and with the fact that he used Uniqua's as a way to not be lenient on the magic power of the magic skateboard he used, it was satisfying to see how he really developed himself. So that warranted it to be my pick. So then next we got Pablo and the acorns, where we had some strong parts throughout. I mean, to talk things through, there was that Pablo and Uniqua duel over the crystal, which was finding how to use ships to battle each other with. Pablo having a meltdown over the water being in his way were probably one of the most funniest sequences from the show itself. So I didn't go for that. And also, on par, the moment that Pablo was fearful of crossing the bridge, so he got a little bit of assistance to get through. But for me, I think my personal answer would be when Pablo finally accepts the acorn mold, because of how much he really grew to love his dynamic with the acorn members that made him believe that it has more merits and values than rather using a stupid crystal to rule the world, which also had Unico make a change of heart and join in as well. So through all of that, I think my personal answer would be this. And then to the episode with the superhero team. I did like the moment where Unico tried to stop it with her strength, but because of the slippery environment that they were in, it only started pushing her back. The characters being able to succeed in freeing the boulder was satisfying enough, but I feel like there was one really funny moment that just beat the usual picks I would make, and I ended up landing on the part where Tasha tried to embrace the power of an ostrich to fly, which Tyrone quickly realizes ostriches don't fly, which was pretty too late as she already leaped off the minecart and started falling. But yeah, a really funny moment that also educated viewers to understand particular birds that doesn't have the ability to fly, like an ostrich. So next up, the Dipper Diner episode. The thrill really stemmed from the villainous alien who was shrinking things. But I'll talk about some notable moments, like Pablo and Unico when they first met Hugs. That was something. Them trying to shield Hugs from the cops because it is essentially a mistaken identity. Tasha being shrunk by Blarg, the evil alien. But personally, I'll always stick with the probably inspiring moment of Hugs standing up to Blarg and telling him off for the wrongs of his actions, which I'm so surprised that he relented right away, which there could be some lore behind him that maybe he wasn't as evil as people thought and he was just enjoying the powers that he had but wasn't aware of the effects that it was causing on others. Not going to take away the fact that a lot of his actions were intentional too, but still, it was a very empowering moment to see how Hugs became more relevant to the story, being the main figure that had Blarg develop a change of heart and rebound from his heinous acts. So that's why I'm going to choose this one. Then we got that episode where a sea monster invaded the water park. And honestly, I do have a small amount to go off of. I mean, I did like the visual of the sea monster basically making himself feel at home at the water park, because we definitely needed that scene of him finding comfort. I also do like the moment of Unico trying to keep her composure when revealing the whereabouts of the sea monster, because Tyrone and Pablo don't know how to grow a bit of better eyeballs. But for the sake of storyline purposes, my easy answer is when the sea monster was able to help the trio finally be able to fulfill their 6th somersault dive. So yeah, there's no question with this choice. And finally, the Not So Nice Dragon episode, where there's something to recall. I mean, Austin attempting to try and interact with the evil dragon, not knowing that it's a different one, was humorous. And it's kind of rich coming from Pablo being the one to calm him down. Obviously, the knights trying to stop the evil dragon, but failing. I also did enjoy the chase sequence that ultimately led to the evil dragon getting stuck in the castle door frame for a bit. But really, the peak of them all has to be when Austin, the greatest grabber in the world, is able to transform the evil dragon from bad to good. And seeing of Austin, of all characters, having this big moment, especially for the final episode production-wise, feels like a nice way to culminate the story to give the likes of Tasha and Austin more to glean on with their roles in this episode. So with all that, this was the conclusive choice. And that ends it off there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and click on that like and subscribe to see more videos moving forward. So until then, I appreciate you guys tuning in.